Okay. We're set. Trying to think if there's a way I can do this. Nah. I was trying to think maybe if I could get the chat dialog box on screen with the web page. I don't feel like doing that. So, this is I just got up today. I am a little drowsy. I'm trying to get up earlier, but it's not working. So it's 11:12 today. And I just woke up not long ago. Or I guess I was up technically since like 10:10. But I only got up like half an hour ago. So I thought this would be the perfect time to indoctrinate myself. So I'm going to read some anarchist literature. We have title, The Conquest of Bread, author Peter Kropotkin. Topics, agriculture, classical. Date, 1892. Notes, English translation first published in 1907. So let's do this. Short book. We'll read some of it today. See if there's anything worthwhile in it. Preface. One of the current objections to communism and socialism altogether is that the idea is so old, and yet it could never be realized. Schemes of ideal states haunted the thinkers of ancient Greece. Later on, the early Christians joined in communist groups. Centuries later, large communist brotherhoods came into existence during the Reform movement. Then the same ideals were revived during the great English and French revolutions. I'm guessing by Reform movement he means Reformation, because when I think Reform movement, I think of the British Reform movement, which was over a thing called the Reform Bill, I believe, and ended up starting the Reform Club, which is a really great old gentleman's club. A really, really great building. It was in the Paddington movies. But yeah, I guess he's talking about the Reformation. And finally, quite lately, in 1848, a revolution inspired to a great extent with socialist ideals took place in France. And yet, you see, we are told how far away is still the realization of your schemes. Don't you think that there is some fundamental error in your understanding of human nature and its needs? At first sight, this objection seems very serious. However, the moment we consider human history more attentively, it loses its strength. Well, I agree with this because it actually wasn't that long later. It was about 25 years later, after this was published, that we actually did get a very profound socialist revolution in Russia, the country of this man's birth, I think. And it started a whole cascade of socialist revolutions all around the world. Now, what's interesting about that is that the problem ended up not being the ability to create a socialist revolution. The problem ended up being the ability to make a actually good and moral and prosperous socialist government. And so here we see this is an anarchist perspective rather than a Marxist perspective. And anarchism has had a harder time than Marxism. It hasn't been totally unsuccessful. I mean, we've had some amount of anarchism in Catalonia, for instance, a little bit in Ukraine, I think, and recently quite a bit in Kurdistan. But yeah, these projects don't seem to last very long, unlike the Marxist-Leninist ones, which does make one wonder about the viability of anarchism. We see first that hundreds of millions of men have succeeded in maintaining amongst themselves in their village communities for many hundreds of years one of the main elements of socialism, the common ownership of the chief instrument of production, the land, and the apportionment of the same according to the labor capacities of the different families. And we learn that if the communal possession of the land has been destroyed in Western Europe, it was not from within, but from without, by governments, which created the land monopoly in favor of the nobility and the middle classes. We learn, moreover, that medieval cities succeeded in maintaining in their midst for several centuries a certain socialized organization of production and trade. That these centuries were periods of rapid intellectual, industrial, and artistic progress, and that the decay of these communal institutions came mainly from the incapacity of men combining the village with the city, the peasant with the citizen, so as jointly to oppose the growth of the military states, which destroyed the free cities. Okay, there's a lot there. So we have really on our hands, it seems. It does seem like he's supporting the guild system, which is interesting. But anyway, we have on our hands a question of, can an anarchist society defend itself? Which currently, I think, in Syria, we're seeing that they do seem to have quite a bit of ability there, if they put their minds to it. The question is their commitment? The history of mankind, thus, does not offer, then, an argument against communism. It appears, on the contrary, as a succession of endeavors to realize some sort of communist organization. Endeavors which were crowned with partial success of a certain duration. And all we are authorized to conclude is that mankind has not yet found the proper form for combining on communistic principles agriculture with a suddenly developed industry and a rapidly growing international trade. The latter appears equally as a disturbing element, since it is no longer individuals only, or cities, that enrich themselves by a distant commerce and export, but whole nations grow rich at the cost of those nations which lag behind in their industrial development. Right. These conditions, which began to appear by the end of the 18th century, took, however, their full swing in the 19th century only after the Napoleonic Wars came to an end, and modern communism had to take them into account. It is now known that the French Revolution, apart from its political significance, was an attempt made by the French people in 1793 and 1794 in three different directions, more or less akin to socialism. It was first the equalization of fortunes by means of an income tax and succession duties, both heavily progressive. Succession duties, is that, what is that? Is that related to, like, inheritance tax? But, yeah, what is succession duty? I don't quite know what that's about. A duty is usually like a tariff, right? Both heavily progressive, as also by a direct confiscation of the land in order to subdivide it, and by heavy war taxes levied upon the rich only. The second attempt was to introduce a wide national system of nationally established prices of all commodities, for which the real cost of production and moderate trade profits had to be taken into account. The convention worked hard at this scheme, and had nearly completed its work when reaction took the overhand. I never even knew about that. That's an interesting idea. For the time, I don't know how well it would have worked if it had actually come into being. And the third was a sort of municipal communism as regards the consumption of some objects of first necessity, bought by the municipalities and sold by them at cost price. Okay, interesting. I didn't know about that either. But it was only for some commodities. It was during this remarkable movement, which has never yet been properly studied, that modern socialism was born. Fourierism with Lange at Lyon, and authoritarian communism with Buonarroti, Babeuf, and their comrades. I have heard of Babeuf, because Babeuf I remember reading about François-Noël Babeuf was like kind of the first French communist, really, from what I remember. And he was around at the time. Charles Fourier, was actually the founder of feminism as a word, and I believe he predated Henri de Saint-Simon, who became kind of a big deal. And it was immediately after the Great Revolution that these three theoretical founders of modern socialism, Fourier, Saint-Simon, and Robert Owen, as well as Godwin, the no-state socialism, came forward. I don't know about Godwin. I never heard of him. I've heard of Owen, of course. Owen actually kind of became a big deal in the United States as well. And from his work ended up coming the individualist anarchist sort of faction that split off from the Owenite society in the United States. But these were what are called utopian socialists these days. Well, the secret communist societies originated from those of Buonarroti and Babeuf, gave their stamp to militant communism for the next 50 years. Interesting. Interessante. To be correct, then, we must say that modern socialism is not yet 100 years old, and that for the first half of these 100 years, two nations only, which stood at the head of the industrial movement, i.e., Britain and France, took part in its elaboration, both bleeding at that time from the terrible wounds inflicted upon them by 15 years of Napoleonic Wars, and both enveloped in the great European reaction that had come from the East. Well, we were talking about how that affected Britain in 1819 when the textile workers revolted and created the Luddite movement. Which was basically a big strike movement of textile workers protesting against the textile industry. In fact, it was only after the Revolution of July 1830 in France. Yeah, that's the revolution that installed Louis Philippe. And the reform movement of 1830 to 1832 in England. Okay, so now he's talking about the actual reform movement. That's weird. He talked about the so-called reform movement there taking place before the revolution. And then now he's talking about the English reform movement. So it was only after these had shaken off that terrible reaction that the discussion of socialism became possible for the next 16 to 18 years. And it was during those years that the aspirations of Fourier, Saint-Simon, and Robert Owen, worked out by their followers, took a definite shape, and the different schools of socialism which exist nowadays were defined. In Britain, Robert Owen and his followers worked out their schemes of communist villages, agricultural and industrial, at the same time. Immense cooperative associations were started for creating, with their dividends, more communist colonies. And the Great Consolidated Trades Union was founded, the forerunner of the labor parties of our days, and the International Working Men's Association. Great Consolidated Trades Union. In France. Oh, yes. Scrumly Wumly. Ah, yes, the good old bread book. It's a pretty interesting read. I feel like, given your identification with nihilism, you could probably be into Max Stirner and Renzo Novatore, probably my favorite authors from the anarchist milieu. I don't believe I remember who Renzo Novatore is. I, of course, know Max Stirner from that iconic napkin drawing that Friedrich Engels made of him, which is the only image we have of what he looked like. But yes, I would like to look into that stuff. I was thinking after this book, I would read, what was it called? The Extinction of Pauperism, I think, by Napoleon III. If I enjoy doing this on stream, I could maybe do that one on stream, and then after that, maybe I could look into those. In France, the Fourierist Considerant issued. Why did I say established? See, I'm dyslexic. I tell you, I'm dyslexic because I just make up words that aren't there. In France, the Fourierist Considerant issued his remarkable manifesto, which contains beautifully developed all of the theoretical considerations upon the growth of capitalism, which are now described as scientific socialism. Sorry, are we talking about Proudhon? When did that happen? I thought we were talking about Fourier. No, we're talking about Robert Owen. Okay, we're talking about Robert Owen. Sorry, I'm lost. So the Considerant issued Owen's remarkable manifesto. Yeah, okay. The wording of this is a little bit hard to follow, but let's continue. Proudhon worked out his idea of anarchism and mutualism without state interference. Louis Blanc published his Organization of Labor, which became later on the program of Lassalle in Germany, Vidal in France, and Lorenz Stein in Germany further developed in two remarkable works published in 1846 and 1847, respectively, the theoretical conceptions of considerant. And finally, Vidal and Pecure, the latter in a very elaborate work, as also in a series of reports, developed in detail the system of collectivism, which he wanted the Assembly of 1848 to vote in the shape of laws. So a lot of this I've never heard of. I've heard of Louis Blanc. I think. Or maybe no, you know what? I don't know if I have. I might be, I think I'm confusing him with a younger guy named Louis-Auguste Blanqui, who was involved in the Paris Commune. So I don't know if I've heard of Louis Blanc, although the name sounds familiar. I've of course heard of Proudhon, but these other guys, Vidal and Lassalle and Stein and Pecure, I have never heard of these guys. Robert Anton Wilson, for all your anarchism needs. Never heard of him. However, there is one feature common to all socialist schemes of the period which must be noted. The three great founders of socialism who wrote at the dawn of the 19th century were so entranced by the wide horizons which it opened before them that they looked upon it as a new revelation and upon themselves as the founders of a new religion. Socialism had to be a religion, and they had to regulate its march as the heads of a new church. Besides, writing during the period of reaction which had followed the French Revolution and seeing more its failures than successes, they did not trust the masses, and they did not appeal to them for bringing about the changes which they thought necessary. They put their faith, on the contrary, in some great ruler. He would understand the new revelation. He would be convinced of its desirability by the successful experiments of their phalansteries or associations. Again, I put the word organization in there where it's not even there in the text. Phalanstery. What is a phalanstery? You know what? It reminds me of the word phalanx. So I imagine it has to do with like the same principle of the phalanx, which is creating a kind of wall of defense using the bodies of people, of soldiers, and their shields and spears. It was reminding me also of the word phylactery. That's why I was confused. Phylactery is a totally irrelevant concept. Anyway, so this new ruler we're talking about, and he would peacefully accomplish by the means of his own authority the revolution which would bring well-being and happiness to mankind. A military genius, Napoleon had just been ruling Europe. Why should not a social genius come forward and carry Europe with him and transfer the new gospel into life? That faith was rooted very deep, and it stood for a long time in the way of socialism. Its traces are ever seen amongst us down to the present day. Yeah, I mean, the benevolent ruler idea, we kind of have been through that a shit ton of times. Now, since the writing of this book, the 100 years that followed this book saw the kind of trial of that idea. So I'm kind of with him here. I'm guessing he's gonna be saying that he doesn't agree with this idea, and I'm kind of with him on that. It was only during the years 1840 to 48, when the approach of the revolution was felt everywhere, and the proletarians were beginning to plant the banner of socialism on the barricades, that faith in the people began to enter once more the hearts of the social schemers. Faith on the one side in republican democracy, and on the other side in free association and the organizing powers of the working men themselves. But then came the Revolution of February 1848, the middle-class republic, and with it broken hopes. 4 months only after the proclamation of the Republic, the June insurrection of the Paris proletarians broke out, and it was crushed in blood. the wholesale shooting of the working men, the mass deportations to New Guinea. Really? Okay. Did they have... I guess they had in France some part of New Guinea at that point. Or maybe they just cooperated with the British. Although I know that it wasn't the British, it was the Dutch, wasn't it? Yeah, because the Dutch had half of New Guinea, and then the other half, I don't think the Prussians had it at this point, but I don't know who did have it. Because I thought that the Prussians got it a lot later. Anyway, this is irrelevant. We don't need to be talking about New Guinea. I was just surprised that New Guinea was the area of deportation. Although, I mean, that would kind of suck going to New Guinea, wouldn't it? Anyway, and finally, the Napoleonian. Wow, I've never heard that word. Napoleonian. I like that word. Napoleonian. Finally, the Napoleonian coup d'etat followed. The socialists were prosecuted with fury, and the weeding out. Yeah, so this is actually the guy I kind of wanted to read his book too. I believe it's called The Extinction of Pauperism, which is kind of the book that got him elected president. Because it was like a social message book, and then I guess he comes around and does this. Once he becomes president, he crushes the insurrection, the June insurrection, with blood. The socialists were prosecuted with fury, and the weeding out was so terrible and so thorough that for the next 12 or 15 years, the very traces of socialism disappeared. Its literature vanished so completely that even names, once so familiar before 1848, were entirely forgotten. Ideas which were then current, the stock ideas of the socialists before 1848, were wiped out of the memories and were taken later on by the present generation for new discoveries. What a tragedy. However, when a new revival came about 1866, when communism and collectivism once more came forward, the conception as to the means of their realization had undergone a deep change. Right. Now we're starting to see mass-based socialist theory, right? The old faith in political democracy was gone. And the first principles on which the Paris working men agreed with the British trade unionists and Owenites when they met in 1866 at London was that the emancipation of the working men must be accomplished by the working men themselves. Upon another point they also fell in. It was that the labor unions themselves would have to get hold of the instruments of production and organize themselves. The French idea of the Fourierist and mutualist, so this is doomer socialism right here. It's like, no one's going to help us. The only hope we have is doing it ourselves. Which I guess you can see how that kind of also gave birth to the fascist movement. Perhaps 1866 is not only the birth of modern sort of international socialism, but also national socialism. And so this is at London, a meeting between the Paris working men and the British trade unionists and Owenites. Okay. Upon another point they also fell, and it was that the labor unions themselves would have to get hold of the instruments of production and organize production themselves. Right, so this is where syndicalism, like true syndicalist politics, really is born. The French idea of the Fourierist and Mutualist Association thus joined hands with Robert Owen's idea of the Great Consolidated Trades Union. Right, okay, which was extended now so as to become an international working men's association. Okay, so this is the birth of, like, the International Working Men's Association, then. It's the coming together of Fourierist and Mutualist, the association idea that was popular among the Parisians, and then the Robert Owen Consolidated Trades Union. Again, this new revival of socialism lasted but a few years. Soon came the War of 1870 to 1871, the uprising of the Paris Commune, and again, the free development of socialism was rendered impossible in France. But while Germany accepted now, from the hands of its German teachers Marx and Engels, the socialism of the French 48ers, the socialism of Considérant and Louis Blanc, and the collectivism of Pécure, France made a further step forward. In March 1871, Paris had proclaimed that henceforward it would not wait for the retardatory portions of France, and intended to start within its commune and its own social development. We will not wait until socialism comes to Timbuktu. The movement was too short-lived to give any positive result. For shame. It remained communalist only, but the working classes of the old International saw at once its historical significance. They understood that the free commune would henceforth be the medium in which the ideas of modern socialism may come to realization. The free agro-industrial communes, of which so much was spoken in 1848, need not be small phalansteries, or small communities of 2,000 persons. They must be vast agglomerations like Paris, or still better, small territories. These communes would be federate, even irrespectively of national frontiers, like the Cinque Ports or the Hansa. Are we talking about the Hanseatic League? I am not familiar with this area of, like, trade history. And large labor associations must come into existence for the intercommunal service of the railways, the docks, and so on. Such were the ideas which began vaguely to circulate after 1871 amongst the thinking working men. Interesting, especially the Latin countries. So here we get the rise of hardcore syndicalism emerging in the late 1800s in the Latin countries specifically, which makes sense because it's in France and Italy that we get the development also of national syndicalism, and we'll see how that leads to fascism. In some such organization, the details of which life would settle. The labor circles of these countries saw the medium through which socialist forms of life could find a much easier realization than through the collectivist system of the state socialists. These are the ideas to which I've endeavored to give a more or less definite expression in this book. Looking back now at the years that have passed since this book was written, I can say in full conscience. Okay, so this is in England, Bromley, Kent, in October 1906. So it's been a while. This book is from 1892. So now we've already passed the whole crisis of Marxism. I can say in full conscience that its leading ideas must have been correct. The state socialism of the collectivist system has certainly made some progress. State railways, state banking, and state trade in spirits have been introduced here and there. But every step made in this direction, even though it resulted in the cheapening of a given commodity, was found to be a new obstacle in the struggle of the working men for their emancipation. So that we find now amongst the working men, especially in England, the idea that even the working of such vast national property as a railway net could be handled by a federated union of rail employees. That's interesting. Employee. That's a weird way to spell employee. Than by a state organization. Well, that's kind of, the interesting thing about the way socialism was kind of adopted by the powers that be, like, for instance, Otto von Bismarck. And then later the democratic socialists, who sort of knowingly or unknowingly became part of the powers that be. How we, in an attempt to make things a little bit better for the working man, end up kind of making the working man really comfortable to the point where they don't really feel like taking the initiative in this course. Which is why I think you get the anarchist communes coming, where do they come out of? They come out of war-torn areas, like Catalonia in the Spanish Civil War. Suddenly we got this war where society is broken down, everything's in chaos, and who emerges out of that? Anarchists with real collective communes. And then the same thing is happening right now in Syria, with the Kurds, who are influenced by that guy who's in the Turkish prison right now. I think he's still alive, but he's in Turkish prison. Same idea. When everything is already broken down and everyone already has to have a gun in their hands at all times, then you are going to kind of get a reemergence of this idea of, hey, maybe we can take power into our own hands. So that's an interesting concept, that it requires hard times to create a kind of feeling of independence among people. Rabies 444 says, meow. Are you a cat? I don't speak that language, but I do like cats. On the other side, we see that countless attempts have been made all over Europe and America, the leading idea of which is, on the one side, to get into the hands of the working men themselves wide branches of production, and on the other side, always to widen in the cities the circles of the functions which the city performs in the interest of its inhabitants. Ugh. I don't quite understand that, but let's keep going. Trade unionism, with a growing tendency towards organizing the different trades internationally and of being not only an instrument for improving the conditions of labor, but also to become an organization which might, at a given moment, take into its hands the management of production. Cooperativism, both for production and for distribution, both in industry and agriculture, and attempts at combining both sorts of cooperation in experimental colonies. And finally, the immensely varied field of the so-called municipal socialism. These are the three directions in which the greatest amount of creative power has been developed lately. Of course, none of these may in any degree be taken as a substitute for communism or even for socialism, both of which imply the common possession of the instruments of production. But we certainly must look at all the just mentioned attempts as upon experiments. Okay, that was a weirdly phrased sentence, but I get it. Like those which Owen Fourier and Saint-Simon tried in their colonies, experiments which prepare human thought to conceive some of the practical forms in which a communist society might find its expression. The synthesis of all these partial experiments will have to be made someday by the constructive genius of some of the civilized nations, and it will be done. But samples of the bricks out of which the great synthetic building will have to be built, and even samples of some of its rooms are being prepared by the immense effort of the constructive genius of man. That's the preface, written in Bromley, Kent, October 1906. It's interesting that that England became a safe haven for so many communists, because Marx also went to England, and I believe Engels also did as well. It's interesting. It shows that there was a bit of a free speech culture there, a little bit more than what you had on the continent. Laurie Krikorian is also saying meow. Chapter 1, Our Riches. 1. The human race has traveled far, since those bygone ages when men used to fashion their rude implements of flint and lived on the precarious spoils of the chase, leaving to their children, for their only heritage, a shelter beneath the rocks, some poor utensils, and nature vast ununderstood, and terrific, with whom they had to fight for their wretched existence. During the agitated times which have elapsed since, and which have lasted for many thousand years, mankind has nevertheless amassed untold treasures. It has cleared the land, dried the marshes, pierced the forests, made roads. It has been building, inventing, observing, reasoning. It has created a complex machinery, wrested her secrets from nature, and finally it has made a servant of steam. And the result is that now the child of civilized man finds ready at its birth to his hand an immense capital accumulated by those who have gone before him, and this capital enables him to acquire merely by his own labor, combined with the labor of others, riches surpassing the dreams of the Orient, expressed in the fairy tales of the 1001 Nights. The soil is cleared to a great extent, fit for the reception of the best seeds, ready to make a rich return for the skill and labor spent upon it. a return more than sufficient for all the wants of humanity. The methods of cultivation are known. Actually, they're even better today with artificial fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified organisms. Although pesticides have issues, so we might want to, take that into account. On the wide prairies of America, each 100 men with the aid of powerful machinery can produce in a few months enough wheat to maintain 10,000 people for a whole year. And where man wishes to double his produce, to treble it. Treble, is that another word for triple? Huh, never knew that. To multiply it 100-fold, he makes the soil, gives to each plant the requisite care, and thus obtains enormous returns. While the hunter of old has to scour 50 or 60 square miles to find food for his family, the civilized man supports his household with far less pains and far more certainty on 1,000th part of that space. Climate is no longer an obstacle. When the sun fails, man replaces it by artificial heat. And we see the coming of a time when artificial light will also be used to stimulate vegetation. It is actually. That did end up happening. Meanwhile, by the use of glass and hot water pipes, man renders a given space 10 and 50 times more productive than it was in its natural state. The prodigies accomplished in industry are still more striking. With the cooperation of those intelligent beings, modern machines, themselves the fruit of 3 or 4 generations of inventors mostly unknown, 100 men now manufacture the stuff to clothe 10,000 persons for a period of 2 years. In well-managed coal mines, the labor of 100 miners furnishes each year enough fuel to warm 10,000 families under an inclement sky. I don't know what the word inclement means. Oh, clement, clemency. I don't know. And we have lately witnessed twice the spectacle of a wonderful city springing up in a few months at Paris, without interrupting in the slightest degree the regular work of the French nation. And if in manufactures as in agriculture, and let's start that again. And if in manufactures as in agriculture, and as indeed through our whole social system, the labor, the discoveries, and the inventions of our ancestors profit chiefly the few, it is nonetheless certain that mankind in general, aided by the creatures of steel and iron which it already possesses, could already procure an existence of wealth and ease for every one of its members. Truly, we are rich, far richer than we think, rich in what we already possess, richer still in the possibilities of production of our actual mechanical outfit, richest of all in what we might win from our soil, from our manufactures, from our science, from our technical knowledge, were they but applied to bringing about the well-being of all. Yeah, that's when it really makes you think, doesn't it? Highly recommend that one. Which one? Slightly above average gaming. Charlie Bradshaw says, even if you do not become an anarchist, congrats on actually reading some of the theory. Oh, I know. Nova says, forever dirt, plan to indoctrinate himself into other ideologies. Yes. After this book, I plan on reading The Extinction of Poverty by Napoleon III. The Extinction of Pauperism, I believe, is what it's called. So that's the next one queued up after this one. Slightly above average gaming says any direction away from communism is a good direction. No, that's insane. What are you talking about? Nova says, don't be political to slightly above average gaming. I mean, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? This whole subject is entirely political. Let's read 2, Chapter 1, Section 2. We, in civilized societies, are rich. Why then are the many poor? Why this painful drudgery for the masses? Why, even to the best unpaid workman, this uncertainty for the morrow? In the midst of all the wealth inherited from the past, and in spite of the powerful means of production, which could ensure comfort to all in return for a few hours of daily toil. That's a good question. I think there's a lot of complicated reasons for that. The socialists have said it and repeated it unwearyingly. Daily they reiterated, demonstrating it by arguments taken from all the sciences. It is because all that is necessary for production, the land, the mines, the highways, the machinery, food, shelter, education, knowledge, have all been seized by the few in the course of that long story of robbery, enforced migration, and wars, of ignorance and oppression, which has been the life of the human race before it had learned to subdue the forces of nature. It is because, taking advantage of alleged rights acquired in the past, these few appropriate today 2/3 of the products of human labor, and then squander them in the most stupid and shameful way. It is because, having reduced the masses to a point at which they have not the means of subsistence for a month or even for a week in advance, the few allow only the many to work on condition of themselves receiving the lion's share. It is because these few prevent the remainder of men from producing the things they need, and force them to produce not the necessities of life for all, but whatever offers the greatest profits to the monopolists. In this is the substance of all socialism. Take indeed a civilized country. The forests which once covered it have been cleared, the marshes drained, the climate improved. It has been made habitable. The soil, which bore formerly only a coarse vegetation, is covered today with rich harvests. The rock walls in the valleys are laid out in terraces and covered with vines bearing golden fruit. The wild plants, which yielded naught but acrid berries or uneatable roots, have been transformed by generations of culture into succulent vegetables, or trees covered with delicious fruits. Thousands of highways and railroads furrow the earth and pierce the mountains. The shriek of the engine is heard in the wild gorges of the Alps, the Caucasus, and the Himalayas. The rivers have been made navigable. The coasts, carefully surveyed, are easy of access. Artificial harbors, laboriously dug out and protected against the fury of the sea, afford shelter to ships. Deep shafts have been sunk in the rocks. Labyrinths of underground galleries have been dug out where coal may be raised or minerals extracted. At the crossings of the highways, great cities have sprung up, and within their borders all the treasures of industry, science, and art have been accumulated. Whole generations that lived and died in misery, oppressed and ill-treated by their masters, and worn out by toil, have handed on this immense inheritance to our century. For thousands of years, millions of men have labored to clear the forests, to drain the marshes, and to open up highways by land and water. Every road of soil we cultivate in Europe has been watered by the sweat of several races of men. Every acre has its story of enforced labor, of intolerable toil, of the people's sufferings. Every mile of railway, every yard of tunnel has received its share of human blood. The shafts of the mines still bear on their rocky walls the marks made by the pick of the workman who toiled to excavate them. The space between each prop in the underground galleries might be marked as a miner's grave, and who can tell what each of these graves has cost in tears, in privations, in unspeakable wretchedness to the family who depended on the scanty wage of the worker, cut off in his prime by fire, damp, rockfall, or flood. Okay. Very poetic kind of what do you call it? A little bit bloated text there. He's not challenging that narrative at all. And I would agree with it. But I think maybe at this point in our social evolution in the 21st century, he was writing in the late 19th. Maybe at this point in the 21st, we can come up with a little bit more of a sophisticated understanding of what's really going on, since we have a lot more experience to go off of. Charlie Bradshaw says, others, if you want a look into anarchist thinking, some other proto-anarchists you would look into is Max Stirner, Leo Tolstoy, and even, to some extent, Bakunin. Oh, to some extent, Bakunin? Yes, early stream, Carl, too. Missed. That's okay. Nova says, I really don't like it when political theorists can't just get straight to the point and draw out their works. Everyone from socialists to fascists and liberals do this. Are we criticizing the writing here? It is a little bit, okay, I get it. I mean, I it's not badly written. I do like the kind of, the way he's really hammering this point home. But, like, he's doing it well. If you're gonna do it well. But it is a little bit, okay, I think I got you the first time. Nova, Charlie Bradshaw says, Nova, it comes with the whole fact politics in a sense is a philosophy. And then Nova responds, if someone is making a political argument, they should just get straight to the point. What am I reading? Well, I'm reading... You can see in the URL, actually, I'm reading The Conquest of Bread. You don't need to be sorry that you missed the first part of the stream. It's okay. I was fine without you. But I'm glad to have you here. Oh, man. We continue. We continue. The cities bound together by railroads and waterways are organisms which have lived through centuries. Dig beneath them, and you'll find, one above another, the foundations of streets, of houses, of theaters, of public buildings. Search into their history and you'll see how the civilization of the town, its industry, its special characteristics, have slowly grown and ripened through the cooperation of generations of its inhabitants before it could become what it is today. And even today, the value of each dwelling, factory, and warehouse, which has been created by the accumulated labor of the millions of workers, now dead and buried, is only maintained by the very presence and labor of legions of the men who now inhabit that special corner of the globe. Each of the atoms composing what we call the wealth of nations owes its value to the fact that it is a great part of that great whole. It is a part of that great whole. What would a London dockyard or a great Paris warehouse be if they were not situated in these great centers of international commerce? What would become of our mines, our factories, our workshops, and our railways without the immense quantities of merchandise transported every day by sea and land? Millions of human beings have labored to create the civilization on which we pride ourselves today. Other millions, scattered through the globe, labor to maintain it. Without them, nothing would be left in 50 years but ruins. There is not even a thought or an invention which is not common property born of the past and the present. Thousands of inventors, known and unknown, who have died in poverty, have cooperated in the invention of each of these machines which embody the genius of man. Thousands of writers, of poets, of scholars have labored to increase knowledge, to dissipate error, and to create that atmosphere of scientific thought, without which the marvels of our century could never have appeared. And these thousands of philosophers, poets, of scholars, of inventors have themselves been supported by the labor of past centuries. They have been upheld and nourished through life, both physically and mentally, by legions of workers and craftsmen of all sorts. They have drawn their motive force from the environment. The genius of a Seguin, a Mayer, a Grove, has certainly done more to launch industry in new directions than all the capitalists in the world. I've never heard of any of those, but men of genius are themselves the children of industry as well as of science. Not until thousands of steam engines have been working for years before all eyes, constantly transforming heat into dynamic force, and this force into sound, light, and electricity, could the insight of genius proclaim the mechanical origin and the unity of the physical forces. And if we, children of the 19th century, have at least grasped this idea, if we now know how to apply it, it is again because daily experience has prepared the way. Yeah, okay, we're getting really meta now with it. Man, the only reason I'm even talking about this right now is because of everything that I've been talking about. Isn't that fucking mind-blowing? Where was I? The thinkers of the 18th century saw and declared it, but the idea remained undeveloped, because the 18th century had not grown up like ours, side by side with the steam engine. Imagine the decades that might have passed while we remained in ignorance of this law, which has revolutionized modern industry, had Watt not found at Soho. Skilled workmen to embody his ideas in metal, bringing all the parts of his engine to perfection, so that the steam, pent in a complete mechanism and rendered more docile than a horse, more manageable than water, became at least the very soul of modern industry. Every machine has had the same history, a long record of sleepless nights and of poverty, of disillusions and of joys, of partial improvements discovered by several generations of nameless workers who have added to the original invention these little nothings without which the most fertile idea would remain fruitless. More than that, every new invention, more than that, every new invention is a synthesis, the result of innumerable inventions which have preceded it in the vast field of mechanics and industry, science and industry, knowledge and application, discovery and practical realization, leading to new discoveries, cunning of brain and of hand, toil of mind and muscle, all work together. Each discovery, each advance, each increase in the sum of human riches owes its being to the physical and mental travail of the past and present. By what right, then, can anyone, whatever appropriate the least By what right, then, can anyone, whatever, appropriate the least morsel of this immense whole and say, "This is mine, not yours"? Whew, okay. That was a travail in itself. Let's read what has been said. Slightly above average gaming. Is etymology apolitical enough for ya? If archon means ruler, then monarchy means one ruler. Oligarchy means a group of rulers. Anarchy means no ruler. But we're told anarchy means chaos. Charlie Bradshaw says, does not help that a lot of the time anarchy is usually taken up by edgy teenagers still trying to find themselves. Yeah, give anarchy a bad name. Like, seriously, coming out as an anarchist is like coming out as gay in the 1950s. It's definitely a minority, LOL. Yeah. Yeah, that section was just like, come on. Like, you could have written this in 2 paragraphs, really, if you wanted to. I get it. People enjoy being long-winded. Like, maybe if this were a speech being delivered by a politician, it would make sense, because I can imagine like someone with the speech capacity, like the what do you call it, the oratory capacity of an Oswald Mosley or something. I can imagine him delivering this and it riling up a crowd, but actually trying to read it is kind of monotonous and tedious. But that's just the Gen Z brain, I think. Back then, they didn't get as bored of this shit as we do now. Now I just kind of want people to get to the point. But the point was, what right does anyone have to appropriate the fruit of industry and the capital that creates our livelihoods and say it is his own, if it has come to him via the labor of hundreds, if not thousands, of generations in many different senses. It's not a bad point. It does make you think. Big Rock Candy Mountain Productions. Hey. It's the, how does that song go? Something in the cigarette trees, the soda water fountain. Da, 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 da. I can't remember. Listen to Negative Land. Don't know what that is. Charlie Bradshaw. Kropotkin did come from a lineage of aristocrats / monarchists. Let's read section 3. It has come about, however, in the course of the ages traversed by the human race, that all that enables man to produce and to increase his power of production has been seized by the few. Sometime, perhaps, we will relate how this came to pass. For the present, let it suffice to state the fact, and analyze its consequences. Today, the soil, which actually owes its value to the needs of an ever-increasing population, belongs to a minority who prevent the people from cultivating it, or do not allow them to cultivate it according to modern methods. The mines, though they represent the labor of several generations and derive their sole value from the requirements of the industry of a nation and the density of the population, the mines also belong to a few, and these few restrict the output of coal, or prevent it entirely if they find more profitable investments for their capital. Machinery, too, has become the exclusive property of the few, and even when a machine incontestably represents the improvements added to the original rough invention by 3 or 4 generations of workers, it nonetheless belongs to a few owners. And the descendants of the very inventor who constructed the first machine for lace making a century ago were to present themselves today in a lace factory at Bale or Nottingham, I'm assuming that's not pronounced Baal. I'm assuming it's Baal. I'm guessing that's a French name. And demand their rights, they would be told, hands off, this machine is not yours, and they would be shot down if they attempted to take possession of it. The railways, which would be useless as so much old iron without the teeming population of Europe, its industry, its commerce, and its marts, belong to a few shareholders, ignorant perhaps of the whereabouts of the lines of rails which yield them revenues greater than those of medieval kings. And if the children of those who perished by thousands while excavating the railway cuttings and tunnels were to assemble one day, crowding in their rags and hunger to demand bread from the shareholders, they would be met with bayonets and grape shot to disperse them and safeguard vested interests. In virtue of this monstrous system, the son of the worker on entering life finds no field which he may till, no machine which he may tend, no mine in which he may dig, without accepting to leave a great part of what he will produce to a master. He must sell his labor for a scant and uncertain wage. His father and grandfather have toiled to drain this field, to build this mill, to perfect this machine. They gave to the work the full measure of their strength. And what more could they give? But their heir comes into the world poorer than the lowest savage. If he obtains to leave the fields, it is on condition of surrendering a quarter of the produce to his master and another quarter to the government and the middleman. And this tax, levied upon him by the state, the capitalist, the lord of the manor, and the middleman, is always increasing. It rarely leaves him the power to improve his system of culture. If he turns to industry, he is allowed to work, though not always even that, only on condition that he yield a half or two-thirds of the product to him whom the land recognizes, the owner of the machine. We cry shame on the feudal baron who forbade the peasant to turn a clod of earth unless he surrendered to his lord a fourth of his crop. We call those the barbarous times. But if the forms have changed, the relations have remained the same, and the worker is forced under the name of free contract to accept feudal obligations. For, turn where he will, he can find no better conditions. Everything has become private property, and he must accept or die of hunger. That's a really good point, this idea that he must accept feudal obligations in the name of free contract. So in the old days, you had to stay on the land that you were born in if you were not born a free peasant. But then they were like, okay, well, now people can move around. Congratulations. But it doesn't really change the conditions. And in fact, in some cases, it might even kind of make it even worse. Because you no longer even have a right to the land that you're forced to live on, you know? It's, you can get evicted at any time. And, there isn't even, like, a sense that you belong anywhere. You're just, forever some, tramp, basically. He started out as a narodnik, Russian nihilist. That's awesome. Prova1 says, hi, boys. The result of this state of things is that all our production tends in a wrong direction. Enterprise takes no thought for the needs of the community. Its only aim is to increase the gains of the speculator. Hence the constant fluctuations of trade, the periodical industrial crises, each of which throws scores of thousands of workers on the streets. The working people cannot purchase with their wages the wealth which they have produced, and industry seeks foreign markets among the moneyed classes of other nations. In the East, in Africa, everywhere, in Egypt, Tonkin, or the Congo, the European is thus bound to promote the growth of serfdom, and so he does. But soon he finds everywhere similar competitors. All the nations evolve on the same lines, and wars, perpetual wars, break out for the rights of precedence in the market. Wars for the possession of the East, wars for the empire of the sea, wars to impose duties on imports and to dictate conditions to neighboring states, wars against those blacks who revolt. The roar of the cannon never ceases in the world. Whole races are massacred, and states of Europe spend a third of their budgets in armaments. And we know how heavily these taxes fall on the workers. Education still remains the privilege of a small minority, for it is idle to talk of education when the workman's child is forced, at the age of 13, to go down into the mine or help his father on the farm. It is idle to talk of studies to the worker who comes home in the evening, crushed by excessive toil with its brutalizing atmosphere. Society is thus bound to remain divided into two hostile camps, and in such conditions, freedom is a vain word. The radical begins by demanding a greater extension of political rights, but he soon sees that the breath of liberty leads to the uplifting of the proletariat. And then he turns around, changes his opinions, and reverts to the repressive legislation and government by the sword. The vast array of courts, judges, executioners, policemen, and jailers is needed to uphold these privileges, and this array gives rise, in its turn, to a whole system of espionage, of false witness, of spies, of threats and corruption. The system under which we live checks, in its turn, the growth of the social sentiment. We all know that without uprightness, without self-respect, without sympathy and mutual aid, humankind must perish. As perish the few races of animals perish the few races of animals living by rapine. I'm not quite familiar with the word rapine, if that's indeed how you pronounce it. Or the slave-keeping ants. But such ideas are not to the taste of the ruling classes, and they have elaborated a whole system of pseudo-science to teach the contrary. Fine sermons have been preached on the text that those who have should share with those who have not. But he who would act out this principle is speedily informed that these beautiful sentiments are all very well in poetry, but not in practice. To lie is to degrade and besmirch oneself, we say, and yet all civilized life becomes one huge lie. We accustom ourselves and our children to hypocrisy, to the practice of double-faced morality, and since the brain is ill at ease among lies, we cheat ourselves with sophistry. Hypocrisy and sophistry become the second nature to the civilized man. But a society cannot live thus. It must return to truth or cease to exist. This is good, actually. I like this book. This is like a really based, really, what do you call it? Like woke. It's like a really woke for the time analysis, like criticism of all society. Like just seeing through the bullshit everywhere. It makes sense that this guy started out as a nihilist, because I can totally see that. Like everything is a lie, everything is hypocrisy. Everyone's full of shit. We're all a-dodging. Yes, we're all a-dodging our way through the world. Thus, the consequences which spring from the original act of monopoly spread to the whole of social life. Under pain of death, human societies are forced to return to first principles. The means of production being the collective work of humanity, the product should be the collective property of the race. Individual appropriation is neither just nor serviceable. All belongs to all. All things are for all men, since all men have need of them, since all men have worked in the measure of their strength to produce them, and since it is not possible to evaluate everyone's part in the production of the world's wealth. Well, that's all well and good, but how are you going to do that? That's my question, because it's all well and good to say all belongs to all, but the mere act of belonging is kind of it's kind of an exclusive thing. If somebody appropriates some part of a thing, then that's an individual appropriation. And that's how belonging works. You can't just have everything belong to everybody all at the same time. Everything has to be divided up in some sense or another to everyone. And that is what's going to create conflict, the same way that it creates conflict today with the whole capitalist system. So that's what I'm wondering. And that's where this kind of starts to get complicated, you know. All things are for all. Here is an immense stock of tools and implements. Here are all those iron slaves, which we call machines, which saw and plane, spin and weave for us, unmaking and remaking, working up raw matter to produce the marvels of our time. But nobody has the right to seize a single one of these machines and say, this is mine. If you want to use it, you must pay me a tax on each of your products. Any more than the feudal lord of medieval times has the right to say to the peasant, this hill, this meadow belong to me, and you must pay me a tax on every sheaf of corn you reap, on every rick you build. Well, kind of, but then you have to think, well, if somebody isn't defending that land, then the brigands are going to come and appropriate for themselves. So in order to have any kind of defense for the farmer who's trying to cultivate it, we have to be able to defend it with violence. And so that requires a kind of structure that needs to be funded somehow. And then you also have to think about the machines. Like, okay, it's all well and good to say that you can't just hoard this machine and prevent people from using it without paying you. But then what about the maintenance of that machine? How do we ensure that the maintenance of that machine will happen, that people will be responsible with it? Not everybody is going to be responsible. People are going to cut corners. People are going to be lazy. People are going to be cheap. Somebody needs to be there to make sure that the machine is being taken care of. And then what if a bunch of people want to use that machine? Then you have resource scarcity. Well, then you build another machine. But who's going to build that machine? Things get more complicated the more you look at them. So I'm just curious, like, where are these concerns going to be addressed? How are they going to be addressed? I'm curious about where this book is going in that way. All is for all. If the man and woman bear their fair share of work, they have the right to their fair share of all that is produced by all, and that share is enough to secure them well-being. No more of such vague formulas as the right to work or to each the whole result of his labor. What we proclaim is the right to well-being for all. All right. Well, we'll see his justification for that in chapter 2. Claudia Brdella says, anarchism is too utopian to ever work. It's not cynical enough, LOL. Carl, too, says, yes, it requires a very charitable and optimistic view of human nature. Rick Steady 8 says, nihilism as a political belief, for me, isn't really being a pessimist more than it is a belief that people only act for selfish reasons, whether you benefit or not. That's certainly definitely an element of my nihilist thought, for sure. Yeah. All interest is self-interest at a certain point. Let's continue with chapter 2. Well-being for all. 1. Well-being for all is not a dream. It is possible, realizable, owing to all that our ancestors have done to increase our powers of production. We know indeed that the producers, although they constitute hardly 1/3 of the inhabitants of civilized countries, even now produce such quantities of goods that a certain degree of comfort could be brought to every hearth. We know further that if all those who squander today the fruits of others' toil were forced to employ their leisure in useful work, our wealth would increase in proportion to the number of producers and more. This is the fascist idea of you get what you work for. Finally, we know that, contrary to the theory enunciated by Malthus, that oracle of middle-class economics, the productive powers of the human race increase at a much more rapid ratio than its powers of reproduction. The more thickly men are crowded on the soil, the more rapid is the growth of their wealth-creating power. Although well-being creating power, I guess, works too. Thus, although the population of England has only increased from 1844 to 1890 by 62%, its production has grown, to say the least, at double that rate, to wit, by 130%. In France, where the population has grown more slowly, that increase in production is nevertheless very rapid. Notwithstanding the crises through which agriculture is frequently passing, notwithstanding state interference, the blood tax, conscription, and speculative commerce and finance, the production of wheat in France has increased 4-fold, and industrial production more than 10-fold, in the course of the last 80 years. In the United States, the progress is still more striking. In spite of immigration, or rather precisely because of the influx of surplus European labor, the United States have multiplied their wealth 10-fold. However, these figures give yet a very faint idea of what our wealth might become under better conditions, for alongside the rapid development of our wealth-producing powers, we have an overwhelming increase in the ranks of idlers and middlemen. Instead of capital gradually concentrating itself in a few hands, so that it would only be necessary for the community to just dispossess a few millionaires and enter upon its lawful heritage, instead of this socialist forecast proving true, the exact reverse is coming to pass. The swarm of parasites is ever increasing. In France, there are not 10 actual producers to every 30 inhabitants. The whole agricultural wealth of the country is the work of less than 7 millions of men. And in the two great industries, mining and the textile trade, you'll find that the workers number less than 2.5 millions. But the exploiters of labor, how many are they? In England, exclusive of Scotland and Ireland, only 1 million workers, men, women, and children, are employed in all the textile industries. Rather more than 500,000 work in the mines, rather less than 500,000 till the ground. And the statisticians have to exaggerate all the figures in order to establish a maximum of 8 million producers to 26 million inhabitants. Strictly speaking, the creators of the goods exported from Britain to the ends of the earth comprise only from 6 to 7 million workers. And what is the sum of the shareholders and middlemen who levy the first fruits of labor far and near and heap up unearned gains by thrusting themselves between the producer and the consumer, paying the former not a fifth, not a 20th of the price they exact from the latter? Nor is this all. Wait, okay. All these numbers, man. Okay, what are we even talking about? What are we even talking about here? I'm kind of confused. We're talking about the middlemen who are serving a vital function of relaying this wholesale to the public. These are parasites, according to him. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's getting at here. Okay. Wow, we have a lot of comments here. Reciprocal altruism, says Claudia Berdella. Jacob Hasty. You guys should check out Robert Sapolsky's recent couple of books along with The Right to Be Greedy. Good stuff. Claudia says, it is in fact a dream. I'd say an AI based on whatever objectivity there is on things would be the only way such would work. Or if or once that ever happens, then things like universal basic income can happen. Rick Steady 8 says, I used to heavily dabble in Kropotkin and collective socialism, but I gave up on ever seeing any sort of meaningful meritocracy. Ricky, have you ever read Nihilism by André Conscient? Would recommend. Nope. I'll try to check it out, though. I'll find a PDF and send it to you on the Discord if you're interested. Middle managers and bureaucrats. Meow. Yeah, okay. I kind of wanted to read this paragraph again, but I feel like if I do that, I'll just be overwhelmed by numbers again, and it won't be very useful. So let me move on. Nor is this all. Those who withhold capital constantly reduce the output by restraining production. We need not speak of the cartloads of oysters thrown into the sea to prevent a dainty hitherto reserved for the rich from becoming a food for the people. We need not speak of the 1,001 luxuries, stuffs, foods, etc., etc., treated after the same fashion as the oysters. It is enough to remember the way in which the production of the most necessary things is limited. Legions of miners are ready and willing to dig out coal every day and send it to those who are shivering with cold. But too often, a third or even two-thirds of their number are forbidden to work more than 3 days a week, because, forsooth, the price of coal must be kept up. Thousands of weavers are forbidden to work the looms, though their wives and children go in rags, and though 3/4 of the population of Europe have no clothing worthy of the name. Hundreds of blast furnaces, thousands of factories periodically stand idle. Others only work half-time. And in every civilized nation there is a permanent population of about 2 million individuals who only ask for work, but to whom work is denied. How gladly would these millions of men set to work to reclaim wastelands, or to transform ill-cultivated land into fertile fields, rich in harvests. A year of well-directed toil would suffice to multiply fivefold the production of dry lands in the south of France, which now yield about only 8 bushels of wheat per acre. But these men, who would be happy to become hardy pioneers in so many branches of wealth-producing activity, must stay their hands because the owners of the soil, the mines, and the factories prefer to invest their capital, stolen in the first place from the community, in Turkish or Egyptian bonds, or in Patagonian gold mines, and so make Egyptian fellas, Italian exiles, and Chinese coolies their wage slaves. Here we have the rise of the multinational corporation. That sad artifact of modern time, which makes the capitalist no longer responsible to his nation. So much for the direct and deliberate limitation of production. But there is also a limitation indirect and not of set purpose, which consists in spending human toil on objects absolutely useless or destined only to satisfy the dull vanity of the rich. It is impossible to reckon in figures the extent to which wealth is restricted indirectly, the extent to which energy is squandered that might have served to produce and above all to prepare the machinery necessary to production. See, all of this makes me think, what made it so fucking difficult then for the Soviet Union to become a thriving economy when they had all of this? They had, in Maoist China, they had all of this untapped energy potential right at their fingertips, and they couldn't use it at all. They just totally fucked up, had no idea what they were doing. I mean, they could have read this book and thought, yeah, think of all the untapped potential we have. And then it's like, wow, some great leap forward you've made. Oh, looks like I am getting a text. Never mind. It is enough to cite the immense sums produced by Europe in armaments for the sole purpose of acquiring control of the markets and so forcing her own commercial standards upon neighboring territories and making exploitation easier at home. The millions paid every year to officials of all sorts whose function it is to maintain the rights of minorities. The right, that is, of a few rich men to manipulate the economic activities of the nation. The millions spent on judges, prisons, policemen, and all the paraphernalia of so-called justice. I didn't know that paraphernalia had an R there. Paraphernalia. Most people don't pronounce the R. Spent to no purpose, because we know that every alleviation, however slight, of the wretchedness of our great cities is followed by a very considerable diminution of crime. And lastly, the millions spent on propagating pernicious doctrines by means of the press and news cooked in the interest of this or that party, of this politician, or of that company of exploiters. He said meow. Meow meow. There's a video of Marilyn Manson saying meow. Okay. But over and above this, we must take into account all the labor that goes to sheer waste in keeping up the stables, the kennels, and the retinue of the rich, for instance, in pandering to the caprices of society and to the depraved tastes of the fashionable mob, in forcing the consumer on the one hand to buy what he does not need, or foisting an inferior article upon him by means of puffery, and in producing, on the other hand, wares which are absolutely injurious but profitable to the manufacturer. So I think what he's saying here is not necessarily that luxuries are bad or totally useless, but what he's saying is that while people are hard at work producing luxuries for the people who don't need them, the people who actually do need basic essentials are being deprived of those. And so before we set about creating luxuries, let's first set out a way to, give everyone what they need first. And then from that, we'll naturally have a state of affairs where we'll be able to spend some of that labor, be able to divert some of that labor, because we'll have a surplus that's being appropriated by the people who need it. And that surplus then can go to other activities. So I don't think it might sound in this that he's like turning his nose up at luxury of all kinds, but I'm pretty sure that's not what he's saying. What is squandered in this manner would be enough to double our real wealth, or so to plenish our mills and factories with machinery that they would soon flood the shops with all that is now lacking to 2/3 of the nation. Under our present system, a full quarter of the producers in every nation are forced to be idle for 3 or 4 months in the year, and the labor of another quarter, if not the half, has no better results than the amusement of the rich or the exploitation of the public. Thus, if we consider on the one hand the rapidity with which civilized nations augment their powers of production, and on the other hand, the limits set to that production, be it directly or indirectly, by existing conditions, one cannot but conclude that an economic system a trifle more enlightened would permit them to heap up, in a few years, so many useful products that they would be constrained to cry, "Enough! We have enough coal and bread and raiment. Let us rest and consider how best to use our powers, how best to employ our leisure." Yeah, exactly. So that he's saying basically here what I just said. No, plenty for all is not a dream, though it was a dream indeed in those old days when man for all his pains could hardly win a bushel of wheat from an acre of land and had to fashion by hand all the implements he used in agriculture and industry. Now it is no longer a dream, because man has invented a motor which, with a little iron and a few pounds of coal, gives him the mastery of a creature strong and docile as a horse, and capable of setting the most complicated machinery in motion. But if plenty for all is to become a reality, this immense capital, cities, houses, pastures, arable lands, factories, highways, education, must cease to be regarded as private property for the monopolist to dispose of at his pleasure. This rich endowment, painfully won, builded, fashioned, or invented by our ancestors, must become common property, so that the collective interests of men may gain from it the greatest good for all. There must be expropriation, the well-being of all, the end, expropriation, the means. Okay. Claudia Burdella says, "Whatever you're reading sounds very familiar. Should send a link to it on the Discord." Yeah, it's The Conquest of Bread. Section 2 of Chapter 2. Expropriation. Such, then, is the problem which history has put before the men of the 20th century. The return to communism in all that ministers to the well-being of man. But this problem cannot be solved by means of legislation. No one imagines that. The poor, no less than the rich, understand that neither the existing governments nor any which might arise out of possible political changes would be capable of finding a solution. We feel the necessity of a social revolution. Rich and poor alike recognize that this revolution is imminent, that it may break out in a very few years. Oh boy. Well, it did break out. A great change in thought has been accomplished during the last half of the 19th century, but suppressed as it was by the propertied classes and denied its natural development. This new spirit must break now its bonds by violence and realize itself in a revolution. Right, but see, there's a great sort of fallacy on the left that supposes people are going to understand their condition from a left-wing perspective. But what was kind of proven by the rise of National Socialism of various types and the continual kind of reemergence of that sort of idea of fascism is that a lot of the time people's response to these developments are not very rational, you know? And quite often the proletariat is its own greatest enemy. And quite often the proletariat has no desire to actually fight for its own rights. So that's kind of the issue with this idea of revolution, which might have made sense at the time, but I think developments in history kind of discredited this idea. And maybe that kind of brings more credibility to that older idea of the utopian socialists that he was talking about, who believed that this is a sort of state of affairs that could only be brought about by a strong man, a benevolent leader. But we've seen people do that and try to do that in the past, the Marxist-Leninists, and it's always been a huge disaster. I randomly found this while reading Ted Kaczynski's stuff on that site, LOL. Oh, okay. Scrumly Wumly. One of the major blind spots I notice in Kropotkin is a complete lack of ecological analysis, which isn't entirely his fault. Ecology wasn't very widespread during his time. Yeah, I'm kind of noticing that too. I am kind of noticing, because like he's talking about, oh yeah, we can just continue to grow and appropriate more and more of this unused land. It's like, maybe not all of the land should be used. You know, maybe it's kind of a problem to turn the entire world into a big concrete megacity from pole to pole, as said by William Arnn in Penda Sven. You know, Claudio Burdella says, I rewatched ContraPoint's How to Spot a Fascist recently. It's bad, LOL. Well, it's worse than bad. It's a really stupid is what it is. That video, like, makes no effort to even understand what fascism is. It's like some paranoid Cold World shit that's basically saying, here's what a conservative is. Now I'm going to use this scary word fascist to make you afraid of it, and then turn it into this, like, cryptoid thing that you have to uncover, like, oh, people are hiding this scary secret about them that they're actually fascists. Nobody's hiding being a quote-unquote fascist, because being a quote-unquote fascist to you is simply just being a fucking conservative. Nobody's hiding that. You fucking idiot. You could have just said conservatives are all fascists, so if someone's a conservative, that makes them a fascist. But that doesn't make it for a compelling piece of propaganda, does it? Yeah, it's a terrible video. Carl 2 says, the peasantry revered the old authorities and saw them as natural / ordained by a higher power. Yes, case in point, the whole sort of guerrilla war fought against Napoleon in Spain, led by the Catholic priests, who riled up the peasants to defend the old Bourbon regime against the new invading liberal forces. The Narodniks tried to go to the people, and they refused their lessons. Yes. Yeah, this is the problem with this sort of thinking. This is right here, I think I'm getting to the sticking point in this book, which is, I like the cynicism that he's bringing to it in regards to the whole everything is a lie, everything is a hypocrisy. But then right here we have this idea that oh yeah, we can achieve revolution when everybody gets together. It's like, people aren't, though. People are not going to do that. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you explain to them that this is in their best interest. They're never going to want to do this. They don't actually want this. People don't actually want this kind of responsibility and liberation. They want to be kind of They want things to make sense. And the new doesn't make sense to people most of the time. Whence comes the revolution, and how will it announce its coming? None can answer these questions. The future is hidden. But those who watch and think do not misinterpret the signs. Workers and exploiters, revolutionists and conservatives, thinkers and men of action all feel that the revolution is at our doors. Yeah. Well, what are we to do when the thunderbolt has fallen? We have all been studying the dramatic side of revolution so much and the practical work of revolution so little that we are apt to see only the stage effects, so to speak, of these great movements. The fight of the first days, the barricades. But this fight, this skirmish, is soon ended, and it is only after the overthrow of the old constitution that the real work of revolution can be said to begin. Effete and powerless, attacked on all sides, the old rulers are soon swept away by the breath of insurrection. In a few days, the middle-class monarchy of 1848 was no more, and while Louis-Philippe was making good his escape in a cab, Paris had already forgotten her citizen king. The government of Thiers disappeared, and on the 18th of March, 1871, in a few hours, leaving Paris mistress of her destinies. I think I read that wrong. The government of Thiers disappeared on the 18th of March, 1871, in a few hours, leaving Paris the mistress of her destinies. Yet 1848 and 1871 were only insurrections. Before a popular revolution, the masters of the old order disappear with a surprising rapidity. Its upholders fly the country to plot in safety elsewhere and devise measures for their return. The former government having disappeared, the army, hesitating before the tide of popular opinion, no longer obeys its commanders, who have also prudently decamped. The troops stand by without interfering, or join the rebels. The police, standing at ease, are uncertain whether to belabor the crowd or to cry, "Long live the Commune," while some retire to their quarters to await the pleasure of the new government. Wealthy citizens pack their trunks and betake themselves to places of safety. The people remain. This is how a revolution is ushered in. In several large towns, the Commune is proclaimed. In the streets wander thousands of men who, in the evening, crowd into improvised clubs asking, "What shall we do?" and ardently discuss public affairs in which all take an interest. Those who yesterday were most indifferent are perhaps the most zealous. Everywhere there is plenty of goodwill and a keen desire to make victory certain. It is a time of supreme devotion. The people are ready to go forward. All this is splendid, sublime, but still it is not a revolution. Nay, it is only now that the work of the revolutionist begins. Doubtless, the thirst for vengeance will be satisfied. The Wattons and Thomases will pay the penalty of their unpopularity, but that is only an incident of the struggle and not a revolution. Socialist politicians, radicals, neglected geniuses of journalism, stump orators, middle-class citizens, and workmen hurry to the town hall, to the government offices, and take possession of the vacant seats. Some rejoice their hearts with galloon. I've never heard that word before. Admire themselves in ministerial mirrors and study to give orders with an air of importance appropriate to their new position. They must have a red sash, an embroidered cap, and magisterial gestures to impress their comrades of the office or the workshop. Others bury themselves in official papers, trying, with the best of wills, to make head or tail of them. They indict laws and issue high-flown, worded decrees that nobody takes the trouble to carry out. Because the revolution has come. To give themselves an authority which is lacking, they seek the sanction of old forms of government. They take the names of provisional government, committee of public safety, mayor, governor of the town hall, commissioner of public weal, and whatnot. Elected or acclaimed, they assemble in boards or communal councils. These bodies include men of 10 or 20 different schools, which, if not exactly private chapels, are at least so many sects which represent as many different ways regarding the scope, the bearing, and the goal of the revolution. Possibilists, collectivists, radicals, Jacobins, Blanquists are thrust together and waste time in wordy warfare. Honest men come into contact with ambitious ones, whose only dream is power and who spurn the crowd whence they sprung. Coming together with diametrically opposed views, they are forced to form arbitrary alliances in order to create majorities that can but last a day. Wrangling, calling each other reactionaries, authoritarians, and rascals incapable of coming to an understanding on any serious measure, dragged into discussions about trifles, producing nothing better than bombastic proclamations, yet taking themselves seriously, unwitting that the real strength of the movement is in the streets. All this may please those who like theater. Excuse me. All this may please those who like the theater, but it is not revolution. Nothing yet has been accomplished. Meanwhile, the people suffer, the factories are idle, the workshops closed, industry is at a standstill. The worker does not even earn the meager wage which was his before. Food goes up in price. With that heroic devotion which has always characterized them, and which in great crises reaches the sublime, the people wait patiently. We place these 3 months of want at the service of the Republic, they said in 1848. Keep getting these rather annoying texts. Interrupting my reading. While the representatives and gentlemen of the new government, down to the meanest jack in office, receive their salary regularly, the people suffer. With the childlike faith, the good humor of the masses who believe in their leaders, that they think that yonder in the House, and the Town Hall, and the Committee of Public Safety, their welfare is being considered. But yonder they are discussing everything under the sun except the welfare of the people. In 1793, while famine ravaged France and crippled the revolution, whilst the people were reduced to the depths of misery, while the Champs-Élysées were lined with luxurious carriages where women displayed their jewels and splendor, Robespierre was urging the Jacobins to discuss his treaty on the English Constitution. Well, the worker was suffering in 1848 from the general stoppage of trade, and the provisional government and the House were wrangling over military pensions and prison labor without troubling how the people were to live during this crisis. And one could cast a reproach at the Paris Commune, which was born beneath the Prussian cannon and lasted only 7 days, it would be for this same error, this failure to understand that the revolution could not triumph unless those who fought on its side were fed. That on 15 pence a day a man cannot fight on the ramparts and at the same time support a family. These people suffer and say, how to find the way out of these difficulties. Jacob Hasty says, Scrammily Wamley says, the revolution is at our doors. Well, that aged well, LMAO. Yeah, it did. Nick BT Giggle says, youth of today, always on their phones. It's actually not me who's on my phone. I'm trying to read this shit, and I'm getting interrupted by old people on their phones wanting something from me, which is fair enough. Fair enough. But I'm trying to get away from that, you know? Trying to get away from my phone. Oh. How many sections do we have left in this chapter? We have 3? Okay, just this one. I'm going to read section 3, and then we will pick up on chapter 3 next time. 3. It seems to us that there is only one answer to this question. We must recognize and loudly proclaim that everyone, whatever his grade in the old society, whether strong or weak, capable or incapable, before everything, the right to live. What? I don't think there was a predicate in that sentence. But okay, that was confusing. And that society is bound to share amongst all, without exception, the means of existence at his disposal. We must acknowledge this, and proclaim it aloud, and act up to it. It must be so contrived that from the first day of the revolution the worker shall know that a new era is opening before him, that henceforward none need crouch under the bridges with palaces hard by, none need fast in the midst of food, none need perish with cold near shops full of furs, that all is for all, in practice as well as in theory, and that at last, for the first time in history, a revolution has been accomplished which considers the needs of the people before schooling them in their duties. I mean, so what, are people just going to rob the stores? Just going to hit the stores and loot everything? I mean, sure, I understand the sentiment, but seems like a weird thing in practice to proclaim all is for all. People are going to be sitting there confused, like, wait, all is for all? You mean that? So, what is that, like, what? What am I supposed to do? Just, like, appropriate now? That's what I'm doing? All is for all? But, like, when you appropriate, then you're taking something from someone else. So all isn't for all, is it? It's too paradoxical to make sense. I don't think it would be wise to stand up there and proclaim all is for all, is what I'm saying. This cannot be brought about by acts of parliament, but only by taking immediate and effective possession of all that is necessary to ensure the well-being of all. This is the only really scientific way of going to work, the only way to be understood and desired by the mass of the people. We must take possession in the name of the people, of the granaries, the shops full of clothing, and the dwelling houses. Nothing must be wasted. We must organize without delay to feed the hungry, to satisfy all wants, to meet all needs, to produce not for the benefit of this one or that one, but to ensure the society as a whole will live and grow. But how are you going to do that? That's my question. Like, who's going to do that? How are they going to do it? What's going to happen? Enough of ambiguous words like the right to work, with which the people were misled in 1848 and which are still used to mislead them. Yeah, still to this day they are used to mislead people. The right to work, literally those words are used all the time to mislead people. Let us have the courage to recognize that well-being for all, henceforward possible, must be realized. When the workers claimed the right to work in 1848, national and municipal workshops were organized, and workmen were sent to drudge there at the rate of 1 shilling 8. What is D? I can't remember what D was. Dang. Okay, that was distracting. 1 shilling 8D a day, I guess. When they asked that labor should be organized, their reply was, "Patience, friends. The government will see to it. Meantime, here is your 1 shilling 8D. Rest now, brave toiler, after your lifelong struggle for food." Meantime, the cannons were trained, the reserves called out, and the workers themselves disorganized by the many methods well known to the middle classes, till one fine day they were told to go colonize Africa or be shot down. Very different will be the result if the workers claim the right to well-being. In claiming that right, they claim to possess the wealth of the community, to take the houses to dwell in according to the needs of each family, to seize the stores of food, and learn the meaning of plenty, after having known famine too well. They proclaim their right to all wealth, fruit of the labor of past and present generations, and learn by its means to enjoy those higher pleasures of art and science too long monopolized by the middle classes. And while asserting their right to live in comfort, they assert that what is still more important, their right to decide for themselves what this comfort shall be, and what must be produced to ensure it, and what discarded as no longer of value. The right to well-being means the possibility of living like human beings, and of bringing up children to be members of a society better than ours, whilst the right to work only means the right to be always a wage slave, a drudge ruled over and exploited by the middle class of the future. The right to well-being is the social revolution. The right to work means nothing but the treadmill of commercialism. It is high time for the worker to assert his right to the common inheritance and to enter into possession. So that's the preface and the first 2 chapters of The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin. I will be continuing this book next time on Chapter 3, Anarchist Communism. I'm loving the reading. How do people have notifications on for anything? LOL. I have notifications just for Discord, but then they'll turn off automatically. So if I have if somebody puts something in a channel, then it'll go off. But then if somebody puts anything else in that channel, it won't go off unless I check that channel first. I think that's how it works. Or the server, rather. Not the channel, necessarily. But then I get texts from people in my life as well. Vibrate mode, gang. Well, vibrate mode doesn't help one way or the other, because I have to check the text. It could be something important that somebody wants me to know. It's not like it's the sound of I've done stuff before where I've turned my chime off. That's not the problem. The problem is getting interrupted by it, whether the sound is on or not. I didn't get a notification for this even with notifs activated. Yeah, sometimes that happens. Notifications, the bell on YouTube is not always perfect. Ugh. So, what do we think about this book so far, people who are here? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What would you rate it? So far, I'm getting the impression that anarchists are better at tearing things down than building things up, which is kind of a stereotype, but it seems to be kind of true in this case. But we haven't heard out his case yet about anarchist communism. and how that will work. So I want to hear him out. It's nice to not have to read it myself this time. There you go. Scrumly Wumly says, it has its strong points but falls into some idealistic traps. Fair enough. It's idealistic, not realistic. Really, this guided/group reading. I think you might have missed a word there, but I think I understand what you're saying. I'm pretty good at reading things in terms of providing the theater of the narration. I'm not. I am like dyslexic enough that I'll say words wrong. I'll get the wrong word. I'll take out words where they're there sometimes. So I'm getting better at that, but that's a big kind of challenge for me, reading sometimes. But I am good at providing the narrative kind of ups and downs, I think. I'm definitely a lot better than other people. Like, there are other people who would do this kind of thing and just flatly read blah, 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 so that you don't even really understand what you're reading. Like, I feel like people who do that, people who read stuff just very flatly, they can't possibly really understand what they're reading, can they? Because it's like they're not getting what's being communicated. Part of it is the rhythm and the like, part of the idea is in how you say it, you know? It's not just in the words alone. Really like. Bro Potkin has too positive a view of humanity. I love this. I love the book. It's been 20 years since I've asked read it. And I'm very much enjoying your reading. Please keep going in the future. I will. This could be a morning thing for me, where I wake up with my first cup of coffee of the day and read. I could read several different things. You know, after this, I'm going to read The Extinction of Pauperism. After that, you know, we could go on to other areas. Oh, last Reddit, not asked Reddit. That's hilarious. You're doing text to speech. Oh my god. Yeah, always check your text to speech before sending it. Anyway, I didn't even know you could do that on YouTube chats. That's cool. Yeah. Anyway,